discuss about the one of the most important topic under the contract law. That will be the essentials of a valid contract. And this is mentioned under Indian Contract Act 1872. Moving on, what are the essentials of a valid contract? In simple terms, a contract means when two parties put into writing an agreement which contains certain obligations, that is, promises, which are to be performed by such parties. And when such written agreement becomes enforceable by law, it becomes a contract. So, it is nothing but two parties coming together and putting their obligations, promises right in writing and making an agreement with each other to fulfill the obligations and promises made to each other. And when that is registered as an agreement, that becomes enforceable by law and it becomes a contract according to the Indian Contract Act. So, enforceable by law, what does that mean? So, enforceable by law means when the agreement has acquired the force of law only for those who are the parties to it, and any violation of such agreement will attract legal action. For example, A and B are two people who are getting into an agreement. That is, you sell me a load full of raw materials, and further, then I will supply it to my manufacturing unit, and I will produce 100 bags out of it. It may be raw cotton or fabric or whatever it is, and A is supposed to send the raw materials to B, and using that, B is going to manufacture 100 bags. What happens if A doesn't send the raw cotton to B? B cannot manufacture bags and his business will fall. He will be undergoing losses. So it is an issue for him. So both the parties, whoever enter into the contract, are obligated, are forced to fulfill the terms and conditions and obligations that they have accepted to in the contract. So it is inevitable for them to follow the contract or the agreement that they have entered into, because if they don't do so, then it will be enforceable by law, which means that will attract penalties, fines, and any other sort of legal sanctions that the law can impose on the party who is not keeping up with the agreement that he has entered into. Okay, so Contract Act defines a contract as an agreement which is enforceable by law. See, on daily basis, all of us get into many agreements. You may tell your father that you'll be coming home early today. You'll be telling your son that you'll be taking him to a Disney World next week. But is that possible to keep up all the contracts, and are they enforceable by law? No, because they are just mere contracts, and or they are just mere agreements, I would call, not contracts. And when contracts, they don't attract any legal sanctions. No one will punish you if you come home late, telling your father that you'll be coming home early, right? So when an agreement or when a contract is backed up by law, it becomes a contract. And contract is nothing but it is a simple agreement that you have entered with another person, and it is enforceable by law, where the law can punish you for not following that particular contract. Okay, so that is the bare minimum definition, basic definition of the contract. So an agreement is a settlement between two parties which contains obligations or promises which both parties need to fulfill. As I already mentioned, it is an agreement between two or more than two parties. In an agreement, there can be two parties or three parties or four party agreement. It can be any number of people. But one common thing is that, one essential thing is that all of the parties who have entered into the contract must follow the terms and conditions in the contract that they have agreed to, that they have accepted to. So if they're going to fall back in following the agreement that they've entered, they'll be attracting penal sanctions or fines. Okay, so when such an agreement is made, binding by law, it becomes a contract. So, as I told, every day we'll be getting into a lot of contracts with our parents, siblings, friends, partners, but still they are not enforceable by law. It is just a mere agreement or a mere promise that you have made. But when does it become a contract? Because marriage is a contract in certain religions. Why? Because it is backed by the sanctions approved by law. When law is going to punish for not following a particular set of contracts or set of agreements, that becomes a contract. Okay, so therefore an agreement consists of reciprocal promises. What is reciprocal promises? You're going to reciprocate. You accept something, you have to fulfill that. In the same way, the other person who has accepted something to do, then even he has to fulfill the terms and conditions that he has promised for to fulfill. Okay, which are not to be performed by the parties to contract. So it consists of an agreement which are in reciprocal promises, and they are to be performed by the parties. Only then the agreement sustains, only then the contract sustains. So promises are reciprocal when both the parties have to perform something for one another. So when two parties accept something and do mutually respect the agreement and fulfill the agreement, it becomes a contract. So moving on, we have Pollock, who says every agreement and promise enforceable by law is a contract. And Salmond, who is a very eminent jurist, says that a contract is an agreement creating and defining obligation between two or more persons. As I already mentioned, in a contract, it can be multilateral contract, it can be bilateral contract. So it can be between two parties, it can be between three or more parties. So how many number of parties you want to get into with a contract is your decision, but all of that is an agreement made with each other, and it defines the obligation between two people or more than two people by which rights are acquired by one or more to act or forbearance of the part of the others. So when you enter into a contract, there is an obligation set to the other person who is entering into a contract with you to fulfill the terms and conditions that he has signed in the agreement or the contracts. Okay, so similarly, Anson says that the law of contract is that branch of law which determine the circumstances in which a promise shall be legally binding on the person making it. Okay, so moving on, we have certain essentials to enter into a valid contract. Section 10 states that conditions which are required for a contract to be valid. So section 10 of the Indian Contract Act talks about certain conditions which are supposed to be fulfilled to a contract becomes valid. Okay, first one is there must be an offer made. Okay, so firstly there must be an offer from either of the parties. Either A does it or B does it. Without an offer, a contract cannot arise. So without an offer, a contract cannot take its birth. So a contract is basically coming into action only when there is an offer made. So the first step to get into a contract is to make an offer. Either of the parties is going to make an offer. However, in certain cases, this principle could not be applied. So there are exceptions to it, which we can discuss later. And right now we are just dealing with some of the very basics of this particular topic so that you can have a better idea and knowledge as to what this subject actually deals with, this topic deals with. Okay, and for instance, Mullah talks about the situation which offer and acceptance could not be traced. For example, or for instance, a commercial agreement reached after multiple rounds of negotiation. So when there's multiple rounds of negotiation, Mullah says that Mullah is a an author, and he describes in his books that it is not essential that there should be one instance in which the offer is made and the other person has accepted it, because there can be multiple rounds of negotiations, and in which round they actually came into a proper consideration of the contract is not known. It is not traceable easily. So next is acceptance of the offer. So any person has to get into a contract, he has to accept the offer made to him. Okay, so this is the second important and vital step in getting into a contract. So the offer must be accepted, and accepted by the person to whom it is intended. So, for example, A and B are two people, and A has made an offer to B. Can someone else accept on behalf of B? No. If the offer is made to B by A, then only B has the right to accept that offer, and someone else, a third party, cannot accept the offer on behalf of the B. Okay, so an offer by A to B has to be accepted by B only, as you already know by now. So parties must be competent. The next rule or essential element to start a contract is the parties must be competent to the contract. Under the laws they are subjected to, that is, they must be legally capable to get into a contract. So, an incapable person, an incompetent person cannot get into a contract. Now, for example, who are competent people? Competent people are nothing but people who are above 18 years, that is, who are adults, because contract cannot be entered into with a minor. Okay, because he doesn't have the capacity to fulfill the obligations of the contract. That's what the law says. So he must be of a sound mind. You cannot enter into a contract with a madman, because whatever you contract you enter with him will not be fulfilled by him, because he is not in the mental capacity to act validly. So you cannot enter into a contract with a madman. He has to be a mentally competent, he must be physically competent, that is, he must be an adult and not a minor. And he should not be what lunatic, they say. And they also say that a person must not be broke, that is, he must not be a pauper. So apart from these people, you can enter into a contract with anyone who is of sound mind. Okay, so next is consideration. Next very important vital element to get into a contract is consideration. For the performance of promises there must be a consideration. Okay, so consideration is very important for anyone who is getting into a contract. Now, what is a contract? Sorry, what is a consideration? So very standard definition of a consideration is nothing but the money involved, the money involved for fulfilling the contracts. Okay, that is standardly considered as consideration. It may not be money every time. Okay, it can be an some other it can be in cash or kind, or any other sort of a payback that you will be giving for the other person who is involved in a contract with you, in an agreement with you. So consideration need not be money always, but there is something in return given to that particular person or party for fulfilling the contract accepted. Okay, so something given for performance of the promise or fulfillment of the agreement that he has accepted, and that is called the consideration in contracts. Okay, next is free consent. Can you force anyone to get into a contract? No, you cannot force anyone to get into a contract, because getting into a contract must be out of free will, out of their own intention. And so, according to Section 10 of the Contract Act, the agreements are contracts if they are made by free consent. So, it means that the contract must be entered into out of the parties with their own, will and acceptance. No one can actually force them or push them to, or deceive them into getting into a contract. Okay, and there must be an intention. So they must be intentionally getting into a contract. You cannot just foolishly or unknowingly, or just closing your eyes and when you're half asleep, you cannot just saying that I'm entering this contract, because you should be willfully, with all the conscious, you should be getting into a contract, because there will be obligations that you have to fulfill after getting into a contract. So that is very important. So for you to do that, you must be in a proper acceptance mindset, where you're going to, you're aware that you're going to fulfill this particular contract, this particular acceptance that you're making into an agreement. Okay, and there must be an intention to enter into a legal relationship. So there must also be an intention to enter into a legal relationship. So your mind must be clear about getting into this contract. Okay, unknowingly someone forcing you or someone pushing you to get into a contract will not be a valid contract. Certainly, contract must be certain and not ambiguous or vague. Okay, that's what section 29 says, and it must be clear, it must be certain. The terms and conditions entered into must be clear, it must be certain, it must not be ambiguous or vague in any way. Okay, so a contract must not be expressly declared void. So if a contract is expressly, what is expressly declared void? When a contract is expressly declared void is in such circumstances where it is impossible to fulfill the contract in the outset itself. For example, if A makes an agreement that if he marries his daughter, he will be getting 1 crore rupees payment. Is that an acceptable contract? Is that a valid contract? No, it cannot be, because any person who is getting into a contract cannot have such conditions, because you cannot force his daughter to marry a particular person. It is, she will be getting married out of her own free will, out of her own choice. So anyone getting into a contract to getting married to her forcefully, or doing such contracts or getting into such contracts or agreements will be void on the outset itself. Such contracts can also be illegal sometimes. For example, if you tell B that he has to get 100 kgs of contraband or drugs into a country, cross the border, can that contract or agreement be accepted? It should not be accepted, because they are illegal, and they are, such agreements are considered as void. Okay, so moving on, we have next the offer and acceptance. So what exactly is offer and acceptance? Offer is nothing but you are making an offer to enter into a contract, and acceptance, you are accepting that particular offer made to you, accepting to get into an agreement and a contract where you can fulfill the promise with mutual agreement. That's what offer and acceptance talks about. So offer and proposal are used simultaneously sometimes, and offer is used in the British law, whereas proposal is used in the Indian law. So an offer is the first thing for the formation of a contract. A person making an offer is called an offerer, proposer, and a person to whom the offer is made is called an offeree or proposee. Okay, so they also say that defines an offer, the chitty on the contracts also defines an offer as an expression of an willingness to contract made with an intention, that is to become binding on a person, making as soon as it is acceptable by the person to whom it is addressed. So it is the expression of getting into a contract. How do you show that you are interested in getting into a contract, in working with a person? So that is shown by giving an offer, making an offer, and then accepting that offer. So that is what this person says. And once the offer is made and it is accepted by the other party, they are entering into a relationship of contract and agreement. Okay, and it will be backed by law. When that agreement made between two people is backed by law or has legal sanctions attached to it, it becomes a contract. Okay, so yeah, again, general description about the acceptance. Moving on, we have consideration. So consideration is nothing but it is the acceptance of an offer from another person and making a value to it. Consideration is nothing but giving a value for the performance of that particular promise. So it need not necessarily be money. As I already mentioned, it need not be necessarily money. Normally it is money, but it need not be money all the time. So however, it should be something that is given to as a token of keeping up with the obligations or the promises made in an contract. Okay, so however, it should be something which has been agreed by the parties and has some value to it. Next, usually a contract without consideration is void. So the law says the contract without a fixed consideration is void. However, there are exceptions to this rule under the section 25 of the Contract Act. So, consideration need not be adequate. See, if you cannot gauge for this particular contract the consideration accepted is adequate or not, but even though if there's a consideration made for namesake, even that consideration is considered as legal and binding. However, it must have some value. That's it. Okay. So, consideration for a promise includes either performance of an act or non performance of a certain act. Okay. Consideration can be for performing something or not performing something. Like you don't breach the contract, for that also I'll give you certain discount, even that can be consideration. Okay, so for doing something you pay a value as money or a particular you know whatever is particular uh, consideration, it can be whatever it is, particular value as money, and you also give certain value for not doing something, also for not breaching the contract, for not giving up the contract in between. Even for that you can also give certain consideration for the person. So the law says you need not give consideration only for the performance, but for non performance of something is also considered as valid consideration. So, performance of an act also includes the act of paying money. So, it also includes act of paying money, but need not be always money. Okay, it can be in certain sort of payback and discounts, coupons. It can be in any way paid back. Okay, consideration can be paid back in many other ways. So what are the elements in the valid consideration? So there is consideration, could be a past consideration, it can be present consideration, it can be a future consideration. Everything is detailedly mentioned here if you want just to have a look at it. And many of these what do you say material is available online, and it is freely available, so you can go to that and have a look into these issues. But I'm just trying to explain what is already available online, the material already available online, because many times when you don't come from a legal background, it is hard to understand these simple terminologies also. But with a little explanation and simple examples, it will be easy for you guys to understand. So that is my intention. And moving on, we have more explanation regarding the valid consideration. If you want, you can have a look at it. And it must not be illegal, or it must not be void, and it must not be impossible to perform. Okay, so consideration is not void just because it is inadequate, provided it was at the desire of the promiser. So if the promiser desired to give that much a particular amount as consideration, it cannot be considered as void only because the amount he quoted is less. Okay, so it must be real, not illusionary. So it must be physical, it must be real. It can be held in your bank account or in your hands, or it can be possessed by you. If it is not, it can be tangible or intangible, but uh, you need to acquire it as under the ownership. Only then it is considered as consideration. Okay, so next is the free consent. So anyone who is under the coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation and mistake, if anyone is forced into a contract using these elements, such contracts will not be valid. That is what is mentioned under section 14 of the Indian Contract Act. Because coercion, where there is coercion, that is that the person is facing and undue influence, a person is making an undue influence, asking him to do something that is not forcefully, that he is not supposed to do, and he is not willing to do. And fraud, cheatingly, getting representing A as X and getting him to sign the contract. Fraud like that. Misrepresentation, when you are Anil but you are representing yourself as Mahadev, so that is misrepresentation. So all these things, and by mistakenly, unknowingly, when you are supposed to sign something else, you have signed the contract papers. So if under these circumstances, if a person has entered into a contract, then such contract will not be considered as valid contract. Okay, because free consently, willingly, a person has to get into a contract. No one can force him using any of these elements. It may be coercion, undue influence, fraud, whatever it is. So these five elements, as mentioned under section 14, if are used, then that particular contract will not be considered as a valid contract. Okay, it can be voidable at any point. So coercion, so there's a real description about what coercion is, what undue influence is, and all that with examples it is there. So if you're interested, you can have a look at it, and it will be easy for you guys to have a look at it. And yeah, fraud, what is fraud? It means an act done to deceive the other person, whether to get any advantage from the other person, or because of ill will or enmity, whatever it is, you're trying to take revenge against other person, or you're trying to, get him into trouble. So those things, using those intentions, if you're forcing him to get into a contract, it will not be considered. Okay, so what is misrepresentation? So all of these things are very clearly mentioned here, and these materials, it is also available online. And next we are entering into the competency and capacity to contract. So as per section 10 of the Indian Contract Act, an agreement is a contract if it is made among other essentials, that is by free consent of the parties and competence to the parties. So as I already mentioned, agreement must be, or the contract must be entered um, with the person who is above the age of 18 years, and he should be of a sound mind. He cannot be a lunatic or a madman, and he must be competent to follow the obligations that he is under the contract, under the influence of the contract. And he must be of a sound mind. He must not be barred by laws from getting into a contract, and only in such cases the contract is considered as valid. If not, it can be void at any point of time. It is void from the very initial stage itself. Okay, so a contract entered into with or by a minor is void ab initio, that is, no obligation shall arise since its inception. So the minor person who is getting into a contract with you is under no obligation to fulfill any of the provisions that he is accepted to under the contract. So initially it is waste to get into a contract with the minor, because at any point of time he can get away with it. Okay, so the doctrine of estoppel. So next is the doctrine of estoppel, which is a principle in law, and it prevents a person from taking a different stance from what he had when he had entered into a contract. So it is, the promissory estoppel means when a person made a promise to B that he will purchase tomatoes grown on his farm, and B accordingly grows tomatoes on the belief that A is going to purchase. Okay, so now promissory estoppel prevents A from denying that he did not promise any such thing, because tomatoes are grown by B so that A will buy it on the assurance given by A that he is going to buy it. Now, can he deny? Can A deny buying it? No. Okay, so there is a certain stage in which you can come out of the contract. You cannot do it once it is accepted, especially in the promissory estoppel. If you have promised something and the other person has acted accordingly to it, and then you deny buying it or dealing with it, so it will be a estoppel. So people can stop you from taking such decisions. He can go to the court and he can force you to buy what you have promised. Okay, but this should be very clearly mentioned in the contract or the what agreement that is mentioned. In other words, it prevents him from going back on his promise. That is what the promissory estoppel means. Estoppel is nothing but it is stopping a person, as it clearly says, it is stopping a person to take a particular decision at this particular time, because it's too late. That he would have taken back when B has not yet grown the tomatoes, but now B has already grown tomatoes, and his farm, he has 100 quintals of tomatoes only grown on the demand of A. Now he says, A says he is not going to buy the tomatoes, it will be a loss for B. So at this time A cannot go back on his promise, and that is called doctrine of estoppel. And promissory estoppel is nothing but when you promise something to do and you cannot fall back later on that particular thing. Okay, So, unsound mind, a person who is mad, lunatic, who is not acting straight, who cannot think straight. So, he doesn't know the rules and regulations as to how to behave and how to act in a particular social setup. So, such person who is a madman, who is a lunatic, is considered as a unsound mind person. And section 12 clearly says that any person who is of not sound mind or of unsound mind cannot get into a contract, and it is void from the very initial stage. So I took many of these materials from the blog ipleaders.in, and if you want more details you can just go there and have a look at it, but it's all written and in theory. So I'm just trying to explain whatever is given in the this this is Law With Me channel, and very nice to meet you all for the first time. And yeah, if you like this video, please do like and subscribe and support us. Thank you.